Thank you so much, and it's great to be with you today. As we know, the world of dentistry is in the midst of significant change. There are new disruptions in technology, patient expectations, billing, of course, and it's our responsibility, essentially, to do exactly what this event is all about, to team up, to innovate our way forward, and evolve to ultimately enjoy sustainable success. So let's together explore how we can use the principles of innovation, not so much in the classical sense, but how on an everyday basis to truly drive our businesses forward. Our journey begins on the streets of London. Imagine we're walking through the streets and marveling at the architecture and enjoying the hustle and bustle of the crowd, but then we look down at the street and see this. It turns out that cigarette litter is a significant problem, not only in central London, but throughout the world in major cities. It's unsightly, it's terrible for the environment, bad for small animals or children that might ingest them, just bad all around. And they've tried a bunch of efforts to solve the cigarette litter problem, and nothing has really worked. Enter a non-traditional innovator, an everyday innovator just like you and me named Trewin Restorick. Trewin was not a super genius. He didn't have 13 PhDs. He's not a billionaire. He's an average dude. He has crinkly khaki pants and 10-year-old loafers. But Trewin had always been drawn to the environment, and he noticed the cigarette litter problem. But he decided to do something about it. He decided to deploy a little bit of human creativity to see if he, an everyday person, could solve the challenge. And here's what he came up with. It's called the ballot bin. So imagine as you leave a London pub and you've enjoyed your fish and chips and you're about to toss your cigarette into the streets until you see this glowing yellow box a few feet away. And you're drawn to it, asks you a simple question: which is your favorite food, hamburgers or pizza? And in this case, you vote with your butts. Simple, low-tech invention, something that any one of us could have imagined, really. And the results are staggering. By the way, you can customize these with any two-part questions that you want, and they're really fun. But here's the thing. When ballot bins have been deployed, they've reduced cigarette litter by up to 80%. 80%. The reason I love this example, by the way, Trewin has now built a team of about 50 people. He's in 27 countries around the world, making a real difference. Anyway, the reason I just love this example is it's not Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg or Albert Einstein or someone. It's a normal person who chose to be an everyday innovator. The good news for each of us is we can do the exact same thing. Innovation, creativity, inventive thinking, creative problem solving, these are tools within our grasp. And when we put them to use, we simply elevate our businesses. I'm very proud to be releasing a new book in April called Big Little Breakthroughs: How Small Everyday Innovations Drive Oversized Results. And the book is about everyday innovators like Trewin Restorick. And in fact, it provides a specific game plan, a step-by-step methodology on how we can all bring our dormant creative capacity to the surface. In doing the research for the book, I had the privilege to interview people all over the world: CEOs, celebrity entrepreneurs, billionaires, and everyday people like Trewin. I also conducted almost 1,000 hours of research. And so based on all these new findings, I'm excited to share with you today some specific practical tools, mindsets that you can use, again, to take our businesses to the next level. I'd like you to imagine for just a second putting a simple green dot on a white page. Easy. Any one of us could do it in 2 seconds. So the act itself, that simple act, was not that difficult or complex. But when you add a couple more dots and a couple more dots and you put them together in a thoughtful way, they add up to become a masterpiece. Together, let's flip the principles of innovation upside down. Instead of thinking that it requires some superpower or some wizardry or a lightning bolt of inspiration from the heavens, let's think about it instead as these small little daily acts, big little breakthroughs, micro innovations that independently are not that complex, but over time, they add up to great things. So here's the thought for you. What if creativity, good old-fashioned human creativity, could be the edge that we're looking for, the edge to elevate our businesses and to obviously better serve patients and ultimately to drive meaningful outcomes in the things that we care the most about? We're all searching for the edge, and my argument to you is that that edge might be inside you right now. Together, let's unlock it. So you might be thinking, why now? As mentioned, the field of dentistry is in the midst of significant change. The next 10 or 15 years are poised to really disrupt the way we go about our work. You've got, mail order dentistry applications. You've got new shifting trends in consumer desires and customer and patient desires. You've got new technologies emerging. We've got new ways of treating patients like teledentistry. And so what we know for sure is this. We can no longer simply rely on the models of the past and expect the same results. In fact, today I would argue that we need an entirely new and fresh approach in order to meet the challenges of the day, in order to grapple with changing conditions and mind-numbing speed and fierce competition. And again, the way we do that, I believe, is by tapping into this incredible talent that we all have, but we perhaps don't all use every day. I'd like to introduce you to something that I lovingly call the 70-30 rule. You're probably familiar with the 80-20 rule. Maybe 80% of your results come from 20% of your best efforts. But the 70-30 rule goes like this. If all we do looking out over the next 12 months is what we already know, what we've already been trained in, what our experience suggests, what our game plan already looks like, we're only going to achieve about 70% of the results that we seek. The remaining 30%, think of that as the creativity gap. By filling that gap, we can enjoy tremendous results, but we're going to have to do it as we go. We're talking about making decisions in the face of ambiguity. We're talking about pivoting and course correcting as needed, adapting to changing conditions, innovating our way forward. Now, you might be thinking, okay, that's cool, but give me a little more evidence to support it. Well, don't just take my word for it. The World Economic Forum recently released their Future of Jobs report, and they interviewed leaders all around the globe, asking the question, what are the most important job skills in 2025, just a few years from now? And here's what's fascinating to me. 4 of the top 5 most needed job skills, not 50 years from now, but in 2025, all relate to human creativity. Check it out. Number 1, innovation and analytical skills. Number 3, complex problem solving. Number 4, creative thinking and analysis. Number 5, creativity, originality, and initiative. So what's happened is a flip. In the past, we were taught to learn hard skills, but those hard skills today have become automated or outsourced. Instead, it's the quote-unquote soft skills of the past, the nuance, the finesse, the ability to adapt. Those have become the primary factors of success. And the more we cultivate them, the more we simply win. You might be thinking, okay, that's not really new. I know I need to do this. But if we're not, what might be getting in our way if we're not fully realizing our entire creative potential? Here are some common obstacles, myths, barriers that I hear all the time. Let's quickly dispel them, and then we'll get on to the hard work, actually the fun work, of getting more creative. First myth I hear all the time, hey, only some people are creative, as if 1 out of 1,000 of us were born this way and the rest of us have to suffer. The truth is that every one of us is creative, and it's not just my opinion, the research bears this out, that every person on the planet, if you're breathing, you're creative. In fact, we're hardwired to be creative. That's our natural state. We may need to dust off the cobwebs, but we all can expand our creative abilities. I like to say that creativity is very much like your weight, not your height. I'm not going to grow a foot taller if I try really hard, but I can expand or contract my weight as needed based on nutrition and activity and such. Your creativity is exactly the same way. Every one of us has the ability to bring more creativity to the surface with a little bit of practice. Next key objection I hear, or myth that I'd like to bust, that it's only for certain roles. In other words, if you are in the marketing department or R&D, you should be creative, but if you're doing insurance, then you shouldn't be. And the truth is that we all can be innovative in our own ways. We all can be everyday innovators. You don't need to change jobs or organizations. You can apply the principles of creativity to your specific work and ultimately enjoy better results. Next myth I hear all the time, that it only counts if it's big, as if there was a minimum threshold of $1 billion idea to be worthwhile. The truth is that it turns out, according to a recent study by Harvard, that 72% of the United States gross domestic product doesn't come from the attention, media-grabbing, headline-grabbing big innovations. It comes from the everyday innovations. 72% of our gross domestic product is driven by big little breakthroughs. And again, they may not be as glamorous as their change-the-world counterparts, but they're totally within the grasp of all of us. They're less risky, they're easier to cultivate, and while we're doing them, we're building creative skill. And the other thing I hear all the time is that I'd like to be innovative, but I don't have enough resources. And it's usually like, I don't have enough fill in the blank. I don't have enough time. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough bandwidth. I don't have enough equipment. The truth is that ingenuity is free, renewable, and limitless. In other words, we can all deploy these skills, and sometimes actually being resource constrained, as we'll learn in a little bit, can be a driver, not an inhibitor of creativity. So now that we've knocked out some of these myths, I just want to share quickly, why am I with you today? I've had a very good career. I've enjoyed a lot of success. By the way, a lot of failure too. But am really passionate about one simple thing, and I truly hope that I'm remembered for this, and I truly hope that you experience this and kind of join this movement with me. And my personal mission in life is to help everyday people become everyday innovators. Imagine with me for a second that, and this is the way I see the world, that we have 7 billion people walking around the planet with dormant creative capacity, me included, and I study this stuff, so I think it applies to us all. If each of us can bring even just a little bit more creativity to the surface, the world's a better place. We can enjoy significantly better outcomes in healthcare, in education, in the environment, in our schools, in our churches, in our synagogues, in our companies, all by being a little more creative. And to a degree, I feel like a responsibility, because if we all have this hidden capacity, if I don't help people bring it to the surface, well, that's a shame. So I hope that you join me in not only bringing your own skills to the surface, but in encouraging others to do so as well, helping everyday people become everyday innovators. And to that end, like, the biggest challenge is, how do you start? Here's my suggestion. Think about giving yourself an upgrade. We upgrade stuff all the time. We upgrade our cars, maybe we upgrade our technology or our wardrobes, but why not upgrade our creativity? And I'm not asking for 1,000% or 5,000% upgrade. Think about giving yourself a 5% creativity upgrade, 5%. Totally within the grasp of all of us. And here's the thing, that 5% is a high leverage activity. In other words, 5% might yield 100% better results in a particular area that you're focused on. 5% creativity upgrade within the grasp of all of us. Together, let's make that happen. Now, you might be saying, what does a 5% creativity upgrade look like? What is a big little breakthrough? Let's explore a couple examples. Children's Hospital, University of Pittsburgh. Who are their customers? Sick kids and their families. The leaders of the hospital wanted to create a better experience for those customers. The obvious approach may be softer pillows. The creative approach, the big little breakthrough approach, the 5% creativity upgrade approach, these are the window washers. So a small upgrade, they gave them some costumes, and now you got Superman and Batman rappelling from the roof and entertaining the kids. No productivity was lost. It wasn't an expensive undertaking, but it was an absolute game changer for those kids. It took the attention away from the medical care. The kids looked forward to it for days, forget why they were there in the first place. Isn't it amazing, the power of a big little breakthrough in action? Or what about a really more practical example? I live in Detroit, so we have potholes all the time. But in St. Louis, a man named Frank Serrano woke up one day and noticed a big pothole just outside his home. So being a good citizen, he promptly called up the road commission of his community and reported the pothole, made a complaint, and the road commission promptly did nothing. So he called again, and he sent an email, and he went on social media, and he filled out the forms, and it was getting no attention. And Frank was worried. Frank was worried not only that it looked bad, but that someone could get hurt, maybe blow out a tire on this pothole. So eventually he decided to take matters into his own hands by giving it a big little breakthrough. Here's what he did. On the 3rd month anniversary of this pothole's existence, he threw it a birthday party. He threw it a 3-month birthday party. Takes a cake, lights a candle, films the whole thing, posts it on social media. Well, as people chuckled, they started to share it and quickly got back to the road commission, and within 24 hours, the pothole was fixed. My point is this: we might be looking at obstacles or even opportunities that feel outside of our grasp. But just like Frank Serrano, by putting a little creativity in action, by giving it a big little breakthrough, an upgrade, it's amazing what we can achieve. So with all that in mind, I'd like to frame the rest of our discussion today around 5 big ideas. In my research for this book, I, again, met with people all over the globe, and also it's based on my own 30 years of experience in business. What I've learned is that innovators of all shapes and sizes, in all industries, tend to embrace some common mindsets, common patterns, common obsessions, surprising habits, if you will, of everyday innovators. As we dig in, I would encourage you to think about how you can deploy each of these big ideas right away. They don't require billions of dollars or years of study. Today, like later on today, we can start deploying these mindsets and enjoy the commensurate results. So let's dive in and take a look at these 5 surprising habits of everyday innovators. Surprising habit number 1, start before you're ready. Innovators don't wait. In other words, we often might see something to do, but we wait for permission or a directive or till our game plan has been ratified and approved by the committee and the vice president of finality. Instead, my suggestion is, let's get after it. Let's get started fully recognizing that we're going to have to move forward without certainty. We're going to have to course correct and pivot and adapt as we go. But that's exactly what innovators do. They get after it, they start before they're ready, and ultimately they enjoy terrific results accordingly. It reminds me of the story of Jessica Matthews. Jessica was born in Nigeria. She came to the United States to attend college, and about a year later, she went back to her hometown for her aunt's wedding. The wedding was going great until the power went out. Well, this is a common occurrence, not only in Nigeria, but in many developing countries. You have an old school power system that simply can't keep up with current demand. So what did they do? Well, they do what they always done. They fire up the diesel generators. The party continues, but Jessica and the other guests, they're now breathing in these exhaust fumes. So as her lungs are burning and as she's choking, she says, there has to be a better way. And then she says, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to start before I'm ready. She had no business saying that. She had no energy sector knowledge, no capital, no engineering experience, but she decided to start before she was ready. The next day, as she was watching some kids playing sports, she said, wow, look at the energy out on that field. What if I could capture it? I bet I could power this whole town. Well, this leads to an invention. She teamed up with a classmate of hers who was an engineering student, and together they created something called the socket. The socket looks and plays just like a regular soccer ball, but inside is actually a generator that's being fueled with kinetic motion. That's a fancy way of saying that 1 hour on the soccer field powers a light bulb for 8 hours. Pretty cool. But she didn't stop there. She said, where else? Where else can I use the same principle, motion, to create energy? Her next invention actually came pretty quick. Jump a little rope, charge a mobile device. Recognizing that she couldn't individually manufacture enough toys to change the world, she ended up starting a company, licensing her technology to third-party manufacturers. For example, let's say in a hospital situation, someone's pushing a wheelchair. Well, as those wheels are turning, it can be creating a clean, free, renewable source of power. This turned out to make a real impact in the developing world. By the way, Jessica has created quite the company for herself. All because of this core principle, she decided to start before she was ready. So the key insight for you, for us, is simply this. Let's get started now and then find a way. It's about getting after it and figuring it out as you go. That's exactly what happened with Alan and Dal Klapmeyer. These two brothers just had a young childhood obsession with aviation, kind of like the Wright brothers. They lived in a rural farm community in Minnesota, but they always loved planes. As they got to be older and they read plane journals and they just got into it, they started to think, is there a way they could start a company? Could they become aviation entrepreneurs? Now, meanwhile, they started it in their parents' barn. They didn't have a bunch of resources. They didn't even have a plan. All they had was a vision. And their vision was, could we make flying for an individual hobbyist pilot as safe as jumping in your minivan and heading to the grocery store? So they pursued it. I love this quote. I just found this. I thought it was very clever. But they said, we were dumb enough to start and smart enough to finish. Couldn't think of a better quote to exemplify this principle. Start before you're ready. So here's what they did. It took them a couple years of fiddling around, looking into research, and they learned that another company was licensing a full aircraft parachute. So the parachute was not for a person, it was for the airplane itself. They ended up striking a deal, and it took several years, but ultimately they came to market with the world's first standard issue parachute for the entire aircraft, making the plane much safer. And over the years, it saved thousands of lives. And in fact, they are one of the hottest, it's called the SR-22, by the way, for any aviation geeks, but it's one of the hottest individual pilot planes that's on the market. Wanting to continue to build on that, they had another vision. Could we do something similar and take it to the next level, make it even safer, and this time for a jet? So again, they started before they were ready. They ultimately, after a lot of figuring stuff out along the way, came up with the Vision Jet, a radically new type of jet. First of all, there's only a single engine, which makes it very fuel efficient. You can see the wing, the tail has got a Y shape to it. It's kind of cool, aerodynamic. But still, the best thing is their safety features. Not only is this aircraft equipped with a full deployable parachute, it actually has a technology feature that, God forbid, if the pilot became incapacitated, a young child even, there's a big red button on the dashboard. You push the button and the plane takes over. It automatically locates the closest runway, it alerts the authorities, and the plane lands itself. As I've understood it, it lands so gently that you wouldn't even spill your drink. So Alan and Dal, again, didn't have this vision totally locked in. They didn't have a game plan or blueprints. Instead, what did they do? They started before they were ready. This brings us to our second surprising habit of everyday innovators. Habit number 2, break it to fix it. We've all heard that advice. Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. God, that's terrible advice. I mean, why would we want to wait till something has failed until getting after a better version of it? In fact, I think it's our responsibility to examine the systems and processes and approaches that might be working just fine today and take a fresh approach, deconstruct them, examine them, and rebuild them in a better manner. As we think about the future, obviously that's why we're here today, is to talk about the future. We can't simply rely on the old way of doing things and expect the same results in a world that's changing at a rate like none other in history. Instead, I think it's our responsibility, again, to break it to fix it. I recently learned that concrete is in high demand, as you probably know. It's the second most used material on the planet, second only to water. And the problem is that even though it's in high demand and even though it's a very durable material, it's not very good for the environment. In fact, the manufacturing of concrete consumes 8% of the world's total emissions. Concrete, by the way, has not really changed. In other words, no one has taken a break it to fix it approach. It's been made about the same way since the Roman Empire. Additionally, not only is it bad for the environment, it consumes a ton of fresh water. The concrete industry consumes enough water to fill 3 million Olympic-sized swimming pools every year. As mentioned, the industry has done very little to change. That's just how concrete is. Until this guy came along, Vahid Atakan. Vahid was not a superstar executive. He was an average guy in the concrete industry who happened to be one day sitting at the bar having a beer. And as he's watching the foam coming up in his beer, he said, why is my beer fizzy? And he started thinking about it. Oh, there's CO2 instead of water, blah, blah, blah. And then it hit him. That lightning bolt for a second, that aha moment, that big little breakthrough. And he said, wait a minute. When we're making concrete, what if we used CO2 instead of water? So he flipped the idea around and quickly got after it, started running a bunch of experiments, and ultimately was able to build what's best described as carbon-eating concrete. He takes carbon CO2 that would ordinarily be released into the atmosphere and locks it permanently inside the concrete. Furthermore, it uses far less fresh water. The results are stunning. In fact, when he has done this technology, it reduces carbon emissions by 70%. Now keep in mind, 8% of the world's total carbon emissions comes from concrete. If this was embraced around the globe and you were able to remove 70% of the carbon emissions, that would be the equivalent of taking all the carbon away from the UK and Italy and France and Poland and Mexico. My point here is that as normal people like you and me are sitting there having our beer or whatever we happen to be doing, let's never underestimate the power of a big little breakthrough. Just because we're not in a position of authority or we may not, think that we have the capacity to drive change, think of Vahid Atakan. Here's a single normal person that had an idea that will significantly impact our planet for generations to come. All because he had the courage to take a big little breakthrough and put it into action. Key insight for you as we examine this principle is when we want to break it to fix it, try this simple 3-step approach. Take a system, process, approach, whatever you're working on, and say, okay, let's deconstruct it. Let's break it down into the individual components. And then number 2, let's examine those components. Is there something that could be swapped out? Is there something that's more modern that we could do that's a better approach? And then eventually we ultimately rebuild it in a better way. There's something really magical about taking something apart and building it back up together. Essentially, that's the methodology of break it to fix it. So with that in mind, I'd like to take a quick peek in our innovation toolkit. Over the last 30 years of studying human creativity, I built a bit of a toolkit, some practical tools. Think of them as idea extraction techniques to help you become more creative. Our first technique that I'd like to share with you today, I call it the judo flip. The judo flip. The idea is this. Instead of just instinctively going after a conventional approach, ask yourself, what would it look like instead if I judo flipped it, if I did the opposite? Here's the way the technique works. When you're facing a challenge or an opportunity, make a list of how you would ordinarily solve that problem. What does everybody else do? What's the conventional approach in the field of dentistry? And then draw a line down the page and ask the simple question on the other side of each entry. What's the polar opposite? What would it look like if I judo flipped it? There's something so magical and powerful about taking this oppositional approach, recognizing what conventional wisdom is, and then flipping it upside down, giving it again a judo flip. And that reminds me of the story of recently of what happened with the folks at Nathan's Hot Dogs. So Nathan's every 4th of July has this big hot dog eating contest to see how many hot dogs a contestant can eat in 12 minutes. And over the years, the notoriety has improved and increased, and so has the prize money. Enter a non-traditional competitor named Takuru Kobayashi. Kobe here didn't even like hot dogs, but he sure had his eye on that prize money. He said, wait a minute, maybe I could deconstruct this. Maybe I could examine it and rebuild it. Maybe I could break it to fix it. Maybe I could give it a judo flip. So here's what he does. He says, I'm going to try to reimagine, to reinvent the way that somebody eats a hot dog. So he starts experimenting, playing around with it, challenging approaches. First thing he did, separated the meat from the bun. He recognized that he could take that meat, fold it in half, sort of down it in one gulp. The bun was giving him a bit of a hard time until he tried taking the bun, dunking it in a glass of water, which contestants are allowed, squish out the excess liquid, and also down that in one gooey gulp. Keep in mind, he's eating here for sport, not for pleasure. Well, here's what happened when Kobayashi made his first attempt. For 90 years in a row, before he tried this, the worldwide record for hot dogs eaten in 12 minutes was 25.1 hot dogs, which is disgusting. On Kobayashi's first attempt, he ate 50, which is more disgusting. But you can't argue with the results. He doubled the record. Not because he tried harder, not because he worked faster, not because he put more pressure on himself. It's because he broke it to fix it. He deconstructed it, he gave it a judo flip, and his creativity carried the day. So for us, instead of when we're going after a goal, I just got to work harder and put more burden on myself, follow Kobe's lead. Let's break it to fix it. Let's give it a judo flip. Brings us to our third core mindset, core obsession, core surprising habit of everyday innovators. This one, I call it use every drop of toothpaste. And I imagine in the dental field, you would especially like this reference. The notion here is simply this. Instead of being held up by the resources that we lack, it's about being scrappy. It's about doing more with less, making best optimal use of the resources at hand. This becomes really, creativity is the great equalizer. That's why startups can conquer sleeping industry giants. And that's why you and I, even when we're resource constrained, can still deploy our creativity to carry the day. Quick example of this in action, the folks at Expedia were facing a bit of a problem. In their call centers, very big operation, hundreds of millions of calls a year, and they were trying to figure out, how do we save some money here? How do we ultimately become more efficient and drive our bottom line? So as they started to examine it, they learned that the single biggest call, basically very simple, people just wanted a copy of their itinerary. The big thing they kept hearing from customers is, hey, I need a copy of my itinerary. Pretty simple. And they kept reducing call times, but eventually they said, hey, is there a way we can use every drop of toothpaste and maybe even eliminate this question altogether? So they started to brainstorm and started thinking, how can we just make it easier for people to get their itinerary on their own? What was happening is that even though it was emailed to people, it was getting lost in their spam folder, or maybe people misspelled their email, whatever. So here's what they did. It's two simple, big little breakthroughs. Number one, they installed a big button on the website, get a copy of my itinerary here. Number two, on the call center prompts, it would say, press 2 to get a copy of your itinerary. Simple change, ended up saving a boatload of money. Excuse me. In fact, normally what happened prior to this change, there were 20 million calls asking for itineraries at $5 a call approximately. This was a $100 million problem each year. Those two big little breakthroughs sliced this down by over 85%. They saved over $85 million by making two teeny little changes. So again, let's not underestimate the power of a big little breakthrough. And let's recognize that when we are resource constrained, by using every drop of toothpaste in a really scrappy way. Again, they didn't write new code. They didn't, bring in fancy consultants. They just used every drop of toothpaste and made it happen. Here they are, of course, doing a bit of a victory lap. So I actually started my career playing jazz guitar. I still play today. I'm very passionate about the art form. And actually put myself through college playing music. I had a professor who, when I was studying music, that would force me to remove strings from the instrument. He would make me take off 1, 2, sometimes 3 strings from the guitar. Well, you figure if your resources are cut in half, your creativity is going to tank. But a surprising and counterintuitive thing happened. When those strings were off, I could no longer rely on the patterns that I knew. In other words, I was forced to solve musical problems in a totally different way. And as a result, instead of my creativity tanking, it actually took off. So when you find yourself in the inevitable situation, there's not enough money or time or bandwidth or whatever, we can say to ourselves, like I did playing music, sometimes we can actually let our creativity carry the way. We can do more with less when we use every drop of toothpaste. It reminded me of one of my favorite heroes, MacGyver. You maybe remember the show, but MacGyver, I just loved him because he didn't have any innate powers. Like, he couldn't fly, he wasn't bulletproof, he didn't have x-ray vision, he didn't carry a gun. MacGyver carried a roll of duct tape and some paper clips, but he was always able to get out of a jam and carry the day. So to me, I think it's a perfect model for us when we think about using every drop of toothpaste. It's around resourcefulness. By the way, MacGyver was so popular, it's now part of the English language. Oxford Dictionary defines MacGyver as a verb to make or repair something in an improvised or inventive way, making use of whatever items are at hand. Or my favorite definition is the Urban Dictionary definition, a noun, someone who can jumpstart a truck with a cactus. Love that. Speaking of doing more with less and using every drop of toothpaste, this is a gentleman I've gotten to know over the years named Kali Sweeney. Now, Kali, like me, was born in the city of Detroit, but that's where the similarities kind of end. He had a very rough upbringing. He was abandoned by his parents as an infant. He was tossed from foster home to foster home, and he was in a bad school system, terrible peer influences, and like so many other kids, he got into trouble. He dropped out of school in the 6th grade, joined a gang, got into drugs and guns and violence. By the time he was 16, he'd been both shot and stabbed. But at age 20, a friend said something to him that would change his life forever. The friend said, Kali, everybody that we grew up with, they're either dead or in jail. That was the wake-up call that he needed. And in that moment, he, like our previous principal, said, I'm going to start before I'm ready. He said, I'm going to have to break it to fix it. I'm going to have to change the trajectory of my future. And of course, he didn't have a lot of resources. He didn't have a formal education or certainly didn't have a trust fund, but he had to use every drop of toothpaste. It took him a decade. He got off the drugs, out of the gang, became an honest tax-paying citizen. But at that point, instead of leaving the community, he decided to stay and give back. He wanted to help other kids who were at risk, just like he was. So he ends up cobbling some very paltry resources together and starts something called the Downtown Youth Boxing Gym. It's actually an educational facility. Boxing is simply the lure to get kids in the door, but they're not allowed to train in the ring until they spend a couple hours a day working with an academic coach in the back room. They hear things that some of those kids have never heard before, like you can change your future and you're in charge, you're in the driver's seat, and if you work hard and pursue academics, you can get out of the cycle of poverty. Here's what ended up happening. Again, started this on a shoestring budget. He didn't have fancy government grants or anything. But today, unfortunately, in this zip code where the gym sits, it's one of the top 5 murder zip codes in the United States, a very rough area. The high school graduation rate, in fact, is an abysmal 37%. But the kids that go through Kali's program, high school graduation rate, 100%. 10 years in a row. So much he's made a difference in now hundreds of kids' lives. He's provided hope and changed their future. And appropriately so, CNN recently recognized my friend Kali as one of their top 10 CNN Heroes of the Year. This is what happens not when someone has unlimited resources and a blank check. It's when someone digs down deep and uses every drop of toothpaste. This brings us to our 4th core obsession habit of everyday innovators. Number 4, reach for weird. Now, I know we tend to gravitate toward the tried and true, but my suggestion here is this, with great respect. Let's challenge ourselves to look past the obvious and look for those bizarre, unexpected, unorthodox approaches. Those surprising approaches are the ones that can lead to the biggest outcomes. Reach for weird. Let's do a quick zip around the world and look at some weird in action. Lovely town in Iceland, they were facing a problem. The problem is that traffic incidents involving pedestrians were up 41% over the last decade. Well, they didn't want this to continue happening, so the obvious approach might be install traffic lights or hire more police officers. But the weird approach was this. They painted the crosswalk as a 3D optical illusion, so that as you drive your car up, it looks like these slabs are floating like 3 feet in the air. There's just no way you're going to barrel through that intersection, so it had a significant impact in reducing traffic incidents with pedestrians. Not to mention, it was a good spot to take some selfies. Or let's go on over to Korea. Have you ever been to the grocery store and you're faced with that really insolvable problem? Do you buy the yellow bananas or the green ones? If you buy the yellow bananas, they're good today, but 4 days later, the rest of that bunch is all mushy. You buy the green bananas, you have to wait like 3 months to have a decent banana. Well, here's what happened when one company in Korea decided to reach for weird. They organized their bananas by ripeness. So you buy a package of bananas, and one of them is great today, and the next day the next one's perfect, and the day after that the next one's perfect, and you have the perfect banana for every day of the week. Same bananas, different approach, a weird approach to market. Here's what ended up happening. First of all, they're crushing the competition in terms of sales volume. Second of all, they're charging 3 times per ounce of banana compared to the competitive set, all because they decided to reach for weird. While I'm making you hungry, I want to share with you a quick story of this restaurant, Cuisine Auntie D, in Montreal. Now, we know that in the food industry especially, people tend to exaggerate. There's a lot of puffery. World's best pizza, New York City's best cup of coffee. And we, of course, as consumers, discount these ridiculous, exaggerated claims. Well, this gentleman here, the owner of this Chinese restaurant, one of 65,000 in North America alone, decided to do the opposite, to reach for weird. Instead of puffery, he decided to share in absolute gushing detail, brutal honesty, which became rather funny, his own interpretation of his own menu. Next to every menu item on the printed menu and online, he makes comments like this one. On this particular dish, he says, comparing this to our General Tso chicken, yeah, this one's not that good. Anyway, I'm not a big fan of North American Chinese food, so it's your call. Who says that about their own food? Or what about this one? It's curry flavor, don't expect it to be so tasty, but it's a safe choice. Or my favorite, because of this dish, I gained at least 5 pounds. So here's somebody that's doing the exact opposite, reaching for weird. The result is one of the most popular Chinese restaurants in Montreal. Here we are talking about it miles away, and he has huge amounts of Yelp reviews. The guy's crushing it, all because he decided to reach for weird. So let's take another peek back in our innovation toolkit. Again, it's important to me today to give you some practical tools that you can use in the months and years to come. This one is called Option X. Once again, when we go after a challenge or an opportunity, we often, in our minds, go from an unlimited set of possible choices to a very short list. A, B, or C. We make it a multiple choice. And A, B, and C are grounded in historical reference. My suggestion is, before choosing A, B, or C, ask yourself, wait a minute, time out. Is there a D? Is there an E? Or I like to say, is there an option X? Option X, that's that big, provocative, unexpected, bold, bizarre idea, the unorthodox approach that can make all the difference in the world. Brutally honest menu quotes from the owner, Option X. Painting a crosswalk like a 3D optical illusion, Option X. Bananas organized by ripeness, Option X. Throwing a birthday party for a pothole, you guessed it, Option X. Here's one more fun one I think you'll enjoy. It's called the Bad Idea Brainstorm. When we get together for a brainstorm session, of course, we're there to generate good ideas. So the pressure is on, and we don't want to be judged by our ideas. And so we with the gravitational force of fear, pushes our thinking back, and we tend to share puny incremental ideas. Here's a fun way to solve it. It's a 2-part brainstorm. Part number 1, set a timer like 10 minutes and say, okay, first we're going to take a real-world challenge and brainstorm bad ideas. What's an awful idea? What's a terrible idea? What's an inappropriate or unethical or illegal idea? So before going after good ideas, the whole team writes all over the whiteboards all the bad ideas they can think of. Now, phase 2, an important phase 2. We then stop and examine the bad ideas and look for little kernels. Is there a little nugget in a bad idea that you could flip around to make it a good one? In other words, we're not, of course, going to do a bad idea. But by generating the bad ideas, it pushes our creativity all the way to the edge. And yes, we then have to ratchet it back a little bit to make it rational, but it's a far more productive and far more fun approach than starting with the traditional brainstorm. Give it a shot, the Bad Idea Brainstorm. Okay, this brings us to our 5th and final core obsession, surprising habit of everyday innovators. Habit number 5, fall 7 times, stand 8. I borrowed the exact phrase from a Zen proverb, but it simply is the intersection of creativity and resilience. What this is not is dogged persistence. In other words, it's not just doing the same thing over and over and over again. But first of all, it's recognizing that mistakes are part of the process. And if we don't fail from time to time, we're not trying hard enough. It's recognizing full well that we're going to hit a speed bump. We're going to stumble. And that's okay. That's part of the life's process. But more importantly, it's then as we get back after it, as we dust ourselves off and get back into the fight, it's letting our creativity guide the way. It's adjusting our approach, even slightly at times. It's learning from our mistakes instead of wallowing in them. Fall 7 times, stand 8. Now, most of us have been taught that failing is the worst thing ever, and if we fail, we should be ashamed of ourselves. But an organizational psychologist in Sweden had a different view. Behind me, as you can see, he created something called the Museum of Failure. It's a live, real-world museum designed to showcase the role that failures play in the process of innovation. Let's take a little peek inside. Here's a fun entry. Many of us drink flavor-enhanced and vitamin-enhanced water. So one inventor thought, how about pets? I'm sure they would like the same. So they created Thirsty Cat and Thirsty Dog. Vitamin-enhanced water comes in tangy fish flavor and crispy beef flavor. And to the surprise of no one other than the inventor, this disgusting brown liquid was not a commercial success. This product was gone in less than a year. What about this one? I believe that appetite suppressant candy might be a good product idea. I kind of think they blew it on the name. Can you imagine? Hey, honey, when you're over at the drugstore, can you pick me up a couple packs of AIDS? That'd be great. Thanks. So here's the thing. When we look at these examples, we chuckle, we have compassion, we say, good for you for trying. In other words, we extend this empathy and warmth to these people who gave it a shot. But when we stumble ourselves, think about how brutal we treat ourselves. Why can't we give ourselves the same amount of compassion in the inevitable setback or stumble? Let's understand that failure is a critical stop on the way toward success. And again, let's let our creativity help us guide the way. Key insight here is that mistakes stink in the moment, but truly mistakes fuel discovery. Back to Trowan, our first contestant here today with the ballot bins in London. He actually does a pretty cool ritual with his team to help support this type of thinking. Every Friday, they have what Trowan tells me is called F Up Fridays. Well, they say the full word, not just F, but, let's be PG together. So on F Up Fridays, here's what happens. The whole team, all 50 people, they have a big brown bag lunch. And Trowan goes around the room and asks person after person, what did you F up this week? And people share with pride, not shame, what they F'd up and what they learned from it. When Trowan lands on somebody that didn't F something up that week, he's like, well, why not? What are you trying? Why aren't you trying harder? So he built a cultural ritual to support and encourage responsible risk-taking, to fully recognizing the role that stumbles play in progress, and essentially to help his team fall 7 and stand 8. At a personal level, I had a similar experience, just wanted to share with you. I mentioned a couple times, I'm from Detroit, proud Detroiter. And as you probably know, our city has really suffered over the last several decades. You name a problem, we've had it, from racial divisiveness, dwindling tax base, shrinking population. My hometown has been a punchline. But back in 2010, my partners and I had this kind of crazy idea. Because we kept falling a lot as a community. Instead of just getting back up and doing the same thing, we said, let's be creative about it. We said, what if we started a venture capital fund investing in tech entrepreneurs in downtown Detroit? Not manufacturing, tech entrepreneurs downtown Detroit. People told us we're nuts. They said, you can't do this in Detroit. Go to Silicon Valley, go to New York. But because we cared more about making impact than money, we said, let's just do it anyway. We took over this vacant, abandoned building. It had been bombed out, vandalized, graffiti, and we invested. We made it a special place, and we started backing special, talented entrepreneurs. We helped them apply these principles in action so they could fall 7, stand 8, and they could break it to fix it, and they could reach for weird, and they could start before they were ready. And the results were really stunning. Within just 4 years of launching this venture fund, when we started it, there was 0 startups, tech startups, in all of the 140 square miles of downtown Detroit. Within just 4 years, within 1 square block of our building, there were 70 tech companies and over 1,000 entrepreneurial, creative, talented people working in that 1 square block, hopefully going to their local dentist. But anyway, the point is that I'm not trying to take credit for Detroit's turnaround, although our city is really rebuilding. There are way more important people than me doing way more important things. I just wanted to share with you an example of these principles in action. We had fallen way more than 7 times, but we decided to get back up and get after it with more creative vigor. So, my friends, we've covered 5 big ideas today, and I'd like to recap them, not just in a list, but in one final story that should bring this all together. This is the story of a guy named Jesse Cole. I've gotten to know Jesse recently, fabulous guy, but he didn't always look so dapper in his yellow tuxedo and his Curious George hat. In fact, a few years back at 23 years old, Jesse was flat broke. He always had a dream, though, and his dream was he wanted to be involved in sports. His ultimate dream, which felt totally out of reach, was that one day he wanted to own a sports team. But he learned at the time that hundreds of miles from his home in Savannah, Georgia, the minor league baseball team was going bust. They played in the historic Grayson Stadium here, and the stadium was falling apart, terrible ill repair. Only a couple dozen people showed up for each game, and ultimately the team fell into bankruptcy. At the bankruptcy hearing, nobody showed up to take over the team except for one person. You guessed it, Jesse Cole. So here's broke 23-year-old Jesse Cole with no game plan, no real idea other than he really wanted to do it. So he somehow managed to talk the bankruptcy folks into giving him a shot. So here's what he had to do. He knew he had to rely on these 5 core habits of everyday innovators. First, he had to start before he was ready. Jesse did not have a master plan. He did not have everything perfect. He didn't line up capital. He just went for it. And he knew he'd have to figure it out along the way. He'd have to find his way forward. He decided he'd have to break it to fix it. What was happening before wasn't working. So he decided to say, okay, let's proactively judo flip the old approach to discover a more favorable new one. He had to use every drop of toothpaste. Again, this guy was flat broke. In fact, him and his wife sold everything they owned and spent over a year sleeping on an air mattress in the stadium because they were homeless as they were trying to rebuild this team. He had to reach for weird. You and I probably don't show up in a bright yellow tuxedo every day. Jesse has 7 of them, wears them for each day of the week. And so he's always one to stand out, to push the creative boundaries. And he had a bunch of setbacks, to be clear. It wasn't an easy ride. But Jesse decided to fall 7 times, but stand 8. Here's what ends up happening. First thing he does, he renames the team the Savannah Bananas. Not everyone loved the name, but no one could forget it. He then confronted all the traditions of baseball. He said, what's working and what's not? He realized that many fans felt the game was kind of slow. So he decided to make it more like a circus that has a baseball game breaking out. In between every inning, the players on the field do choreographed dance routines to pop songs. They joke around. They have all these playful skits. It's kind of like the Harlem Globetrotters of minor league baseball. Instead of objectifying young women, putting them in bikinis, he has cheering the team on the Savannah Nanas, a team of elderly women, senior citizens that are very full of fun and vigor. And by the way, not to be sexist, he also has the Dad Bod cheerleading squad. So what ends up happening is people fall in love. They start showing up dressed as bananas. Literally, people have tattooed the Savannah Bananas logo on their arms. People became obsessed. And fans started to show up, all led by Jesse and his infectious enthusiasm. Here he is in his yellow tuxedo cheering the fans on, and before long, the stadium is filled. Jesse is sold out now, all 4,000 seats of the last 100 games, and has a mile-long waiting list to buy season tickets. He didn't even focus on the baseball, really. He focused on the fans, but then the team just started playing better. And Jesse was proudly able to lead his team to a league championship. Jesse did this with no resources other than these 5 core principles. Think what you and I can do with the resources that we have at our disposal. So as we say goodbye, I'd just like to say this. Maybe today, before our time together, you thought this was the face of innovation. But let's pivot that. I think these are the faces of innovation. In fact, I think we're all the faces of innovation. Every one of us has the power to deploy human creativity to drive the outcomes that we care about the most. So as you begin your 5% creativity upgrade, I'd like to get you started. In other words, I'd like to help you start before you're ready. 2 suggestions to get moving. First of all, visit biglittlebreakthroughs.com. There's nothing to buy. It's not a sales pitch, but there's a whole trove of tools, techniques. There's a free assessment tool. There's downloadable worksheets. It's essentially a big, giant toolkit to help you become an everyday innovator. When you go inside that toolkit, it does require a secret code, and I made the secret code for you, Delta Dental. Check it out. Again, totally free, but tons of resources to help get you going. And finally, I would say this. While these ideas are still fresh in your mind, in the next 7 days, see if you can discover just one big little breakthrough, just one. It could be something teeny and tiny, like the way that you greet a colleague or the way you run a team meeting or the way that you fill out a form. But what will happen is that big little breakthroughs are contagious. One idea becomes 6 ideas, becomes 14 ideas. And before long, you start to build momentum, and that momentum becomes unstoppable. Together, as we look forward to the future, let's embrace the principles of creativity. Let's challenge ourselves to become everyday innovators, and let's win this thing one big little breakthrough at a time. Thanks again, everyone. Stay strong and stay safe.